Today, I want to show you how you can build a fully responsive CSS grid inside of Nordcraft. So let's get right started with that. Now, first of all, we want to go to a beautiful website called CSS Grid Generator.netlify.app. And this is a visual way for us to build a CSS grid, and we can adjust the columns. Now, let's say our grid should have 4 columns and 4 rows. There you go. Now, actually, I would do 0 rows or 1 row so that we can make it responsive. But let's just do 4 by 4 for now, and then we will adjust some of the CSS code anyway. And then the gap, let's say we need to do it in pixels, so let's just make it 0 because we want to adjust it to be in rems for responsiveness. Now if I click on may I have some code, you will see the CSS properties that we want to add for it to be a grid. So now that we have that CSS code and got a little bit of help in building that code with this visual editor, we can now take certain pieces that we need from that code and dump it into Nordcraft. So in Nordcraft, the way we start building a grid is by adding a div block. Perfect. And the div block will just be with the 100% for now, and then we will take a look at further options to make it responsive. Now the height will be fit content just for now. And now we will start adding our first item inside of here. Perfect. That item will be 1 rem side padding. There you go. We'll center the content and we'll put a heading inside of here in H2. And I will call this grid item. Look at that. And I will just style it, and then we will see how the grid comes to life. I will make this grade 200. I'll give it a round border of 0.5 rem, just so that we can see what's going on here. And I will go to the grid and do 0.5 rem, and I'll do top and bottom padding 0.5 rem, and then the border will be 1 rem, and the background will be gray 100, and I will add a border color of gray 200. There you go. And now I have not a grid yet, but this will become a grid, and we have it we're now in Flexbox or block, which is the default on which Nordcraft operates, and you see there is no grid option, so this is why we need this external CSS. Now we start by doing a display property of grid. So I'm going to go to the thing that should be the grid, the div block that should be the grid, and I will add an advanced property of display, which we can't set because there is no grid. So in order to set it to be display grid, we would need to go and write custom CSS of display grid. Perfect. Now if we exit the display panel, we're using display grid for this, which will allow us to now use the further elements, the further CSS styles. So let's do grid template columns. We will need that. So let's copy that. And let's add an advanced property here of grid template columns. And now we will put the value inside of here, which will be a repeat because it will be responsive and dynamic of 4 columns. Look at that. And now we will go inside of here. And now you can see how it starts to be a grid. Now we don't need rows because we're just going to go into the columns anyway. If we extend a certain amount of column, like we will go into the rows anyway if we extend the maximum of 4 in the column. Let me show you what I mean. If I copy this item and paste it like 4 times inside of here, it'll fill it out, but once I go the 5th time, it'll start on the next line. So we don't need to work with the rows property because it will already take care of that based on the CSS default. Now the next thing will be the grid column gap and the grid row gap, which is important. This will allow us to make it style it nicer, so when I duplicate them, they're not kissing each other, right? So we will go on that element, we will add this advanced property, and I will do 0.5 rem, and you see how there is now a nice space between those here. Beautiful. Now, what happens if I have many items? Let's duplicate this a few times. If we now go on the next line, you see they're kissing each other again. So we now need to go to the grid row gap. We will copy that CSS property, and we will go to the advanced properties and paste that inside of here, do 0.5 rem. And the moment I click enter, you see the magic is happening. We now have a very nice grid layout. So we got this beautifully going here. Now, does it work dynamically? Yes, it does work dynamically out of the box. So I can go to a variable and I can call this variable items, and I could provide some sample data for that. So let's just add a range filter to produce an array of 10 items. As you can see here, I have now an array of 10 items just for sample data, right? And I could use this and I could loop, I could repeat over this grid item now with the items. You will see I'm populating the grid, and then I just go to the text inside of here, go on FX, and put the item inside of here, right? So you see we're now rendering this grid dynamically. Now what happens when we go into a mobile breakpoint? This whole thing does not look that nice anymore, and most people would not want to have such an experience here where the grid, starts, kind of like shrinking together and having some overflow. So we want to make it responsive at certain breakpoints. Now, for us to decide is which breakpoints are relevant. Now, there are a few things how we can make this responsive. Really, if we really stretch it here, it would go very wide. So we could go on this element here and add a max width. So I can do max width of, well, let's say 75 rem. So if I now go on my really big screen, you'll see it will stop at some point, which is one element of adding responsiveness. Now, another element of adding responsiveness are media queries, meaning if we go smaller than this, at some point where I say, you know what, like at 700, it really gets a little bit too smushed together. I want to remove one column. We can do this. So we would go on this element and add a media query by clicking on style. And that will be, if we go below 700 pixels, for example, I can now adjust some of the properties. The properties I would be adjusting would be the grid template columns. So I will go on below and I will add my advanced property. And I will take the property grid template columns, right? And I will go to advanced and I will, below 700 pixels, put grid template columns. Now, I want to make sure that we only have 3 columns at this breakpoint. So I will take the CSS for 3 repeat columns. And I will now go to this advanced property and paste it inside of here. So you see at a certain breakpoint, we're now going to 3, changing how this grid works. Now let's zoom in a little bit so it's easier for you to see. You see we have 4, now we go to 3, and we are keeping the responsiveness now with media queries. Now there will be some point, probably at 450 pixels, where we say, you know what, 3 is actually a little bit too much. So, let's go to 450 and let's make it 2, right? So we will go on the style and we will say below 450. If we go below 450, now we pretty much know how it works. We just changed this number here in the repeat. So I'm copying this and go below 450, and now we would put this property in here, which I cannot mesmerize CSS properties, so I'm just going to copy that and paste it in here. So I'm going to add the property, and we are now, making this 3 a 2. We can do it visually by just adjusting this here to be a 2, and we will copy the code, and we will just paste this here in this. So now you see, if we click outside of this element here, we're going from having a 4 column grid layout to being at a 3 to being at a 2. And now if we go a little bit further, I would say the average breakpoint for this is like 375. I would do 380. At 380, meaning you would be in mobile view. So you want to add a last style for 300. Let's do 385, right? That would be you're in the mobile breakpoint. And at a mobile breakpoint, you probably want to go with 1 item per column, because that's just the average that people are used to in a mobile experience, right? So if we go below that, we would just, adjust this to be 1. So I would make this a 1. We would get the code. I would copy the CSS template. And now there's actually no repeat on this. So I'm pasting this here. and I'm copying the code that will be used for 1. And this is how we do media queries, which is pretty simple. And now you see we're going all the way from 4 to 3 to 2 for a little bit to like a little bit. This is like an iPad mini, right? To 1. And you can adjust the breakpoints to a specific value that makes sense for you. We see iPhone 15 actually. I think we can actually skip the middle breakpoint to be completely fair, or we should probably adjust it to be 650. Okay. But then the 700 doesn't make sense. So we would need to make it 550. That sounds about right. So let's go to an iPhone, and that would then be, let's do it like 425 in case it's like a max, right? iPhone 15, iPad mini. Oh, that's a iPad mini on the wrong side. MacBook Air, right? We see how those breakpoints change. iPhone 13 mini, you go to that. iPhone 15, you have that. Samsung Pro Max. You can adjust some of the breakpoints based on how you want that. But this is how you do a responsive CSS grid inside of Nordcraft. It's pretty simple to work with that. And if you're building your application in Nordcraft and you may want some extra help in building that, and you don't want to build your application alone, you want to get access to daily office hours, to daily help to get you unstuck, take a look at NoCodeProCode.com. You don't have to build your application alone anymore. I'm here to help you on a daily basis build your application faster, avoid your roadblocks. So if that's something that sounds too good to be true, take a look at the website, and I will promise you it's not too good to be true. It is real, and it is too good to be true while being real. And if you want to look at some of the testimonials that we have, there are dozens and dozens of people who really like it. The testimonials are way behind because there are so many people now who really like it, so there are way more testimonials coming. And if you don't want to be alone in building your application and making things responsive, because that's quite of a pain, take a look at this website, NoCodeProCode.com. That may be something for you. But regardless on if you take a look at it or not, thank you so much for following and supporting this YouTube channel. This really means a lot to me. And I wish you a wonderful rest of your day and happy building of CSS grids in Nordcraft. Take care. Bye.